stay at lots of business hotels, meet with about 400 to 500 different security teams every year, bringing them up to date on what we're seeing, our shared experiences, and how to use technology to get things right in cybersecurity. And as you just alluded to, it's bigger than just an IT issue. It's really about business and mission outcomes and end user experiences today. So it's kind of a dream job. And you know, working at Fortinet as a tier one pure play cybersecurity company is a joy. It really is.
That is excellent, excellent. You know, I think, you know, what you said resonates. Your exposure to so many companies and what they're going through, and seeing the common trends and some of the unique, it gives you a perspective that many CISOs don't have. And certainly those in the technology or outside of that don't have. Yeah. And kind of leading into some of the first areas of questions is really around the leadership with cyber. Yeah. You know, and kind of looking at it from a lens of what do our technology leaders and business leaders kind of need to be thinking about as we go further and deeper into the cybersecurity and technology transformations that we're seeing. Yeah,
so I think underlining everything we're seeing today is really a convergence of networking, security, and the compute, and that we really shouldn't be thinking of those as separate operating silos. And so that's reflected in the trends in demand for C-levels, whether that's a CIO, a CISO, a CFO. You know, surprisingly, most of the CISOs I meet tell me that their biggest challenge isn't the technology, right? It's really about, how do I demonstrate the ROI on security? How does security enable the business outcome? How does security enable a better mission outcome? They get questions from the CFO like, how do you define the ROI on end user experience? And so what I see CISOs struggling with today are the softer issues, the softer skills, if you will, the evangelism, the leadership to get things done on a cross-organizational basis, right? Because what you're seeing is that everything touches each other and they're mutually dependent. So in order to have really good outcomes, you've got to have great application performance. But application performance without really good network performance really is for naught. And if you have great network performance and great application performance, but you have crappy security, it's all for naught.
Right.
And so what we're seeing today are business leaders, if you're on the CFO side of the house, you're being expected to understand the fundamentals of risk management and cybersecurity. And likewise, if you're the CISO, you're being asked to understand marketing. You understand how are you enabling the CMO, your counterpart in marketing, to execute on their business case using security. And so what I'm seeing as a transformational trend in CISOs today is using security to remove friction from the business model. And by removing friction, you accelerate the business cycle, you shorten the process interval, you create networks and applications that are more responsive for better user experiences. At the same time, as you said, the background is how do we do all that at the same time managing risk? So yeah, there's some big changes underway.
Yeah, I think that those are excellent points. And you, being in the business a while, you've kind of seen the shifts in what is required of the technology leaders today. I think those soft skills and being able to articulate the true challenges and risks to the organization, the business leaders, CEO, CFO, in their terms, either from a risk or monetarily. Yeah. You have to be able to translate. And on the other side, to be honest, I mean, the CEOs and CFOs are kind of expected to learn a little bit on the other side, to be able to understand what is being told to them, so they can assess that and make business decisions.
Yeah, so the object of the exercise is to deliver a reasonable level of due care. So now there are 4 questions that they ask you in the aftermath of any disruption, any breach. So what did you know? When did you know it? What did you do about it? And was that reasonable? And so the entire board, the entire leadership team are gonna be asked those questions, right? So when did you know about the following vulnerabilities or the following risks? What measures did you take to mitigate those risks, right? When did you do that? And in the aftermath, was that reasonable? So you're right. Everybody across the leadership team now needs to understand risk management.
And it's only getting tougher. I mean, as we saw in 2020, we've kind of accelerated into a new paradigm with the work from home and kind of seen a lot of shifts in the workforce and what's expected both from the business as well as the employee.
Yeah.
What have you kind of quickly come to realize after the the influx of the pandemic and kind of the changes that business are quickly having to adopt?
So what I've seen is that we're moving towards an anything as a service model, and that we're all millennials. We all have millennial expectations. I'm somewhere in my early 50s, but I have millennial expectations. I have the expectation that every time I interact with a brand, it's going to be meaningful, it's going to be exciting, I'm going to be wowed, I want to be wowed. And if I'm not wowed, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so
Excellent,
the biggest change about during this pandemic is that we no longer think of work as a place we commute to and from. It's just something we do. And that has major effects and changes on everything from industrial psychology, office layouts, real estate prices, geographic locations. You know, technology has this wonderful ability to flatten structural issues so that distance no longer is relevant, right? So that you can have talent and be located in Baton Rouge and still apply that talent in Billings, Montana, or any other place in the world at near real time. And so I think that fundamentally changes the way we look at work, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we entertain ourselves, conduct commerce, etc. Everything fundamentally changes because now we've delivered on this promise of ubiquitous broadband. There's some gaps across that, but fundamentally speaking, we will never ever go back. In the last 12 months, I know of only one enterprise business that said, we're all gonna go back to the business model in the past. Nearly everybody else has some sort of hybrid remote work model. So yeah, fundamental changes across that space. And the number one thing that the business leadership tell me is the ones that were successful were the ones that were able to create new and better ways for their customers, employees, and partners to interact with their brand. And that is really how things are changing. It's about creating those new ways of interacting with your brand to create new business opportunities, new experiences, new
securely.
Yeah, right? Do all that with great levels of security, privacy, right? Yeah.
It's all there. What have you heard from your peers and other technology leaders, like the things that the business leaders can do to support them best? Is it really just a funding issue? Is it really just understanding, kind of better articulating the business strategy so that they can correlate that into a cyber and technology strategy or awareness? Yeah. What is it that you hear most?
What I hear is that we're moving from a discussion about point products and platforms to really a discussion about the architecture, because it's not really a spending issue. We're going to spend somewhere north of $350 billion on cybersecurity, and we're not really making a lot of progress in terms of the effectiveness of that. So somewhere along the way, we've got to think of, what is it? Is it that we're not spending enough? We're not smart enough? We don't try hard enough? I don't think that's the case. I think fundamentally, we need to think about having security in a very persistent, holistic fashion from the entire life cycle of applications, not just thinking about, oh, when do I deploy security? When do I deploy the app? No, it goes beyond that, when the application is being developed. I think likewise, there's an understanding that cybersecurity risks are real, and that, you know, there's a saying in the military that the cyberscape is probably the most prepared battlefield in history. Every inch of it has been reconned. The adversary is persistent. The adversary is there. There's an old saying that understand yourself, understand your adversary, you'll always be victorious, and that every battle is won or lost before it ever starts. And so there's an understanding that there's a lot of risk out there. How do we manage that risk, but deliver on those business outcomes? I think that's where the business leadership really comes together. And the organizations that are succeeding are the ones that have a good balance of that. And they're spending money in a much more informed fashion. So one of the big indications coming out of the pandemic was that those business cases that were stalled in the last 15 months are now being reevaluated. And everyone is telling me, we're trying to figure out, how do we consolidate more, reduce box sprawl. They're reducing the number of vendors to a handful of strategic partners. And they're really thinking about, how do we reduce costs, improve performance and security all at the same time? And doing things like becoming more agile, accelerating time to market, all of those things are being thought of simultaneously. So today it's a much more architectural discussion than it ever is about products. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say, what are the trends in terms of, are we seeing more reaction from the business side in terms of investing in the cybersecurity posture? What are we seeing as the reaction to all that's going on in the world from the businesses? Is it still, and once upon a time it was sweeping it under the rug and kind of like, well, that's not anything we have to worry about. Now it's so in your face, nobody can really ignore it.
Yeah.
And everywhere you turn, it's happening, and you're seeing it live on the street.
I'm seeing it live in my personal life. It's July 4th weekend. It's Saturday, and I get a call that says, "Hey, we've got looks like a global supply chain attack based on Casilla, right? And Jonathan, you're the service provider guy. Can you help respond to that?" So yeah, it's I think every leadership team recognizes it, but we're not panicked by it. It's a known risk right now, and so it's about managing risk and not trying to outrun the bear. The bear is always going to be looking for you.
Yeah.
So how do you prepare for that, right?
I think that, I like that your vocabulary around we're not panicked,
Yeah.
right? I think that's not where we should be. Panic is just going to result in doing something reckless. It's really looking at what's in front of us and trying to make the right decisions. And so kind of to your point earlier, as we're seeing the transformation occur, digital transformation, which I know is still a little gray, trying to reinvent how we engage customers, how we use technology to really better the customer experience and try to grow the organization through some of those means. We're also seeing it start to merge with our demand or need for cybersecurity. And the two are a little bit offsetting one another in terms of, you can kind of see almost 70% of executives think that their digital transformation is now forcing them to look more closely at what's going on in cyber because their exposure is getting larger. Would you agree?
Yeah. So historically, God, that means the early 80s, right? We always think that security and networking follows the compute, wherever the data is being processed, wherever it's being stored, wherever the application is. And so we've seen computing evolve over time from PCs and mainframes and data centers to private clouds to public clouds. It's much more distributed than ever before. Yeah. And so as computing is more distributed, driving and enabling digital transformation, security and networking also need to shift. And so that's underlies one of the major considerations as you think about cloud, other elements of digital transformation, right? That you can't think about security and networking as separate elements. They all have to work together. And so today, when we think about computing, it's cloud, private or public. And when we think about networking, it's no longer router-based hub and spoke architectures. It's really software-defined wide area networks that are incredibly, self-defending, self-healing, and adaptive based upon application performance. And likewise, security needs to adapt as well. And so that when I say an architectural decision, it's really about how do I architect my network that now spans everything from home offices and branch offices, remote locations, and the enterprise edge, connected vehicles in my vehicle fleet, my entire service supply chain management infrastructure across my private clouds, my legacy data centers. And by the way, not everything's going to move to the cloud. There's going to be data lakes and information that are by regulation required to stay on-prem. So pension information, intellectual property, right? So what we have is a very hybrid and very complex operating environment, which we know is going to shift. So the next iteration of computing will be edge-based computing. And so if you're an enterprise now, we got to stop thinking about, moving one step ahead. You have to play chess that's 5 steps ahead. You need to future-proof that infrastructure. That's why I say it's an architectural decision. How am I going to adopt networking, security, and compute as an architecture that really allows me to succeed over the next 5, 10 years? And so when I think about zero trust, I can't think about zero trust and security in isolation of my SD-WAN. SD-WAN, zero trust, and security are so intertwined with the distributed nature of computing because we're no longer routing traffic back to a central data center. We're all of us reaching out, whether we're at home, at work, traveling, we're reaching out to cloud resources, and we expect really great performance, low latency, high reliability, near real-time capabilities. And
Yeah,
that need, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up zero trust. I mean, obviously um, that concept is coming up a lot in terms of our long-term protection,
Yeah.
a design of how we're going to defend ourselves in the cyber world. But for our audience today, I was hoping you could explain a little bit of how to move to that, because it's not one of
Yeah.
those things you could just turn it on, right? It really requires a total revamp of how you're architected, and it's a little bit of a path to get there.
It is. And so zero trust, in a nutshell, was an idea that was formed about 2009 time period by an analyst at Forrester. And this gentleman posited the idea that traffic inside the perimeter should be trusted no more than traffic outside the perimeter. And so there are a couple of principles involved in zero trust. Is that one, you need to identify the person, the device on which the request for network access is being made. You need to authenticate, you need to validate the request, and log and monitor everything. It sounds simple until you're talking about millions of simultaneous sessions.
Right.
So the simple idea is that we need to ensure that only the right people and entities, IoT devices, are able to access information that they need to do their job and nothing more. And so it's an operating philosophy based on least privilege, right? Need to know access. And then from there, there's no such thing as a Ronco zero trust device, right? You just can't set it and forget it. You start off with the idea that, what are we trying to do? There are any number of ways of getting there. You could use a Fortinet, you can leverage our FortiSASE capability, you can leverage a combination of the FortiClient and the FortiGate to do zero trust network access. You can do any number of ways of ensuring and validation, things like network access controls to ensure that. But it starts off with a very important exercise, which is understanding your current state, knowing who you are, right?
But for our leaders and the people joining this, it is kind of a journey to get there. It's certainly nothing you're going to implement and have zero trust.
Yeah, you start off with understanding who your users are, who are the elevated privileges, right? And my recommendation is that you start with people who have the keys to the kingdom, the sysadmins, because they have elevated access privileges. Earlier in my career, when I was speaking with a well-known advanced persistent threat actor, one of the good guys on this side of the table said to me, look, Jonathan, if you want to defend against someone like me and my team, hunt your sysadmins, because that's who we hunt. So once we get into a network, we hunt for the people who have the keys to the kingdom, the sysadmins. Once you compromise their credentials, then you literally can move laterally across the entire network. So start off by understanding who has critical access, right? Ensuring that those folks have only the access they need to do their jobs, and then move outwards to less critical data, less critical people, and do it in an evolutionary process based upon the criticality of the data. That's why I said, before you buy anything, really understand where you are today. What's my current state? And then what is my desired state? And then from there, work backwards, right?
That's great.
And that's the best way. And that's a reasonable approach, right?
Yeah, I like that. That's something people can kind of wrap their head around and kind of use it to get started.
And if they're already a Fortinet customer and using the FortiGate, they can use that in conjunction with the FortiClient and have zero trust network access from the outset. That's an available capability using the Fortinet security fabric. And then beyond that, taking your time and moving forward.
Yeah, let's dive into a little bit to the Fortinet side. We've been a proud partner with Fortinet for about 4 years now. We really believe and engage in those products and really have strong conversations with our customers about it as well. What are some of the things Fortinet is doing currently and is expected to do to combat kind of this shift we're seeing with moving towards zero trust or keeping up with digital transformations?
Yeah, so I think underlining digital transformation is our approach about providing a convergence of security and networking so that it is pervasive, that it is not only security and protection on the LAN edge, the WAN edge, the data center edge, and the cloud edge, but now we have the ability to also look at application development, to make sure that security is considered from the outset as the application is being developed to look for vulnerabilities. You know, the rule of thumb is that for every 25 lines of code, there's a bug, right? And software today is so disaggregated in terms of development that I think security needs to be there at the outset. And it needs to be there continuously as the application is being developed, as it's being deployed, and then all the way through its life cycle to its end of life. And that's why when you look at that Fortinet fabric, there are 40 products in the portfolio that are integrated at an OS level to collect, share information, to really make accelerated decisions about mitigation. We also have partners across 420 different security companies that span 3,200 products that have either written APIs into our fabric, so they all work together. That's really critical. And then when we look at this very mature set of technology that across prevention, detection, and response, we augment that with AI. So we've got about a 12-year history of working on artificial intelligence. And we're at a stage right now where we're using artificial neural networks to process the huge volume of data that we're seeing as the organization becomes more digitally integrated. And we're using AI in conjunction with that fabric. So now you've got a body of technologies that all collect and share information. And now you're accelerating the detection capabilities, leveraging AI. And as you develop those near real-time insights, you can automate the mitigation through that fabric. And so then you begin to operate at machine speed. And that is one of the things that makes us so different. But the big macro trends we're seeing, to shift to cloud compute, means that there's a shift in networking to SD-WAN and zero. So that SD-WAN is going to be foundational to enterprise IT networking for the foreseeable future, right? And zero trust, as we discussed, the ability to ensure that only the right users and entities are accessing the right applications is foundational to security moving forward. And you see that reflected in what Gartner calls SASE, Secured Access Service Edges, which combines SD-WAN and zero trust and firewall and secure web gateway and CASB. But essentially what you're seeing is a recognition that security and networking really need to work together. Because if they're not working together, all you have are optimized bottlenecks on these network edges.
And don't both of them lend themselves to the distributed workforce and kind of get us away from that hub and spoke? I mean, that's really what Fortinet is trying to push.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the changes in networking, you know, we're only going to use MPLS as a fallback because it's expensive. We use that when we absolutely need that for the most critical applications. Yeah. But then the ability to leverage broadband is key. But again, the network is shifting because we're no longer routing traffic back to a computing stack in a central data center.
Right.
Our computing is now distributed across not only our own environments, but a multitude of public platforms. So enterprises are owning progressively less infrastructure, less platform, less software, and consuming it more as a service. And so that ties in with a larger industry theme of anything as a service. One CISO told me, Jonathan, what I'm being asked to do right now is to deliver any service to any person on any device at any location. And to do that with really great experiences and continually use data to drive better business outcomes. So as you drive more data, you make more efficient allocations of resources. You have the two keywords, predictive and proactive capabilities, so that you're doing maintenance before the problem arises. You're proactively sensing opportunities in the marketplace to either create new offerings, accelerate things to market, or to consume resources in a better way. And so you're shortening the business cycles, you're improving the way you're spending money, you're creating new business opportunities. And if you're the transformative CISO today, you're leveraging security to improve performance by going to multi-factor authentication. But then you go one step further. You say, not only am I going to use MFA, which is a standard best practice, but I'm going to use something like FIDO, Fast Identity Online, to go to a passwordless authentication capability. And when we do that, not only do we remove the friction from the business cycle, we improve that user experience, and then we make security move into the background. And by doing that, you get those better outcomes. You get those better experiences.
I know everyone's looking forward to that. Get rid of the passwords.
Yeah.
How close are we?
We're close.
Yeah.
You're going to find that if you look at the analyst hype cycles, I think we're on the cusp of passwordless authentication in an ubiquitous fashion. You know, there are things that Fortinet supports FIDO-based authentication in its firewalls, but you're seeing now the aha moment when you say, oh, the biggest speed bump in digital transformation in this thing called omni-channel customer engagement is authentication. So if you could seamlessly authenticate yourself, you unlock value. So here's Jonathan Nguyen. Jonathan Nguyen happens to be a Major League Baseball, a fan of the Nats. And so when I go into the stadium, watch a baseball game, that team is going to know who I am because I've got a phone with my identity on it, passwordless authentication. And then it's just, hey, Jonathan, we noticed that you're sitting in the following sections. Do you need directions on how to get there? Here's the fastest way. Here's the longest way. We noticed that you like to have Coca-Colas and nacho fries with bacon bits on it. Would you like to have that delivered to your seat? All of these things unlock that customer experience. And that's how the real transformative CISOs are changing their business model. So now you go from being Dr. No to being an enabler of the business, right? Yeah, that's pretty exciting stuff. I smile a lot when I talk about it.
I know we can relate to that. I kind of looked at a few things. There's a number of security concerns. If you could kind of go back and forth on some of the top ones, but I wanted to list a few here just to kind of get your take from the companies you've worked with and what you're seeing. Where is the biggest concern? Is it the compound of all of these? Is there no specific one, or is there one that just stands out heads and shoulders above the rest?
I think all of these things are important, but they all actually have one theme in common. When we think about security, the operating model of the defender is based upon what we believe is actually happening, what we believe is happening in our network environments. The adversary operates from the perspective of what's actually there, because they're trying to penetrate the network. They're trying to get in and understand what's happening. And the delta, the difference between what is actually happening and what should be happening, is typically the anxiety that most CISO teams face. It's the known knowns as well as the known unknowns. Take the statistic that Gartner and others cite, that 99% of all the vulnerabilities exploited were known for at least a year. So just think about that. 99 out of 100 exploits were known for a year, meaning the signature was available, the patch was available. Wow. And yet we're failing on that, right? And that's only going to get compounded. So I think the lack of visibility in your environment, do you understand every user that's only in your environment attempting to access your environment? Do you understand every device, its state? Is it properly configured? Is your firewall properly configured? When was the last time it was configured? Are the digital certificates valid, or have they expired? The unknown, the lack of visibility is I think the biggest problem. And by the way, that visibility challenge is only increasing because we're shifting off of our own infrastructure, our own platforms, and now we're using multiple platforms. We've got employees working on home networks. We've got employees working in cafes. We've got shadow IT. We've got software as a service. We've got multiple public clouds. And I think right now what we have is an embarrassment of riches. We have so many tools that we don't have visibility. Going back to what the analysts have said is that, I think it was Gartner as well, it said 95% of all the cloud security failures will be the customer's fault because they don't have visibility.
That's a hard pill to swallow. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't understand the shared responsibility model. And so who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be communicated, who needs to be informed about the following changes? Look, we were failing when we had physical access to devices and logs, right? So my question to folks when they think about digital transformation is, what's the common denominator that gives you visibility across LAN, WAN, data center, and cloud edges? Right? How do you understand that? How do you have the same look and feel? That's why I think the fabric of Fortinet is so key. It provides a common bridge that gives you visibility across a very distributed and disparate set of computing resources. Yeah. And I think without that, if you don't have visibility, you can't defend what you can't see. And if you look at in my history looking at data breaches, it's often what was not found. I did not know this device was still online. I did not know this device was not properly configured. I did not know that the patch hadn't been applied. I did not know that I didn't have a compensating control in the form of an internal segmented firewall that could have stopped that with a virtual patch. They're all the things that you didn't know. And that's why we're not being victimized by really 0 days. We're being victimized by exploits because hackers and adversaries, they are lazy creatures by nature. They're going to take the path of least resistance for the highest rewards. And so why on earth would I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for a true 0-day when I could exploit 99 out of 100 times something that's already known, but no one has patched it yet and found? Yeah. And that's a problem that spans the largest organizations. If you notice that the most catastrophic data breaches and disruptions often occur with organizations with the largest bench of security folks and teams and the deepest budgets, right? So it's a problem that's for everyone. And I think it stems back to the lack of having an integrated platform. Really, we all as security professionals along the way added devices to technology, and then hope to God that it would work. And then we leave, some poor soul comes in and inherits what we built. It's kind of like being an architect in Rome. You're building on top of centuries of civilizations and architectures and infrastructure, and you have no idea, how it actually interlocks and how valid it is. And so there's a lot of complexity out there. What I think Fortinet does better than anybody else is that we help manage complexity. And if you can reduce complexity, you begin seeing these things get addressed. So if you look at here, right, hackers and adversaries, they're going to be there forever and a day. They use the dark web and formal and informal teaming arrangements. Marketplaces are great tools to bring buyers and sellers together. And what you're going to see is those attacks becoming very thematic, very accelerated, and deep fakes are going to come to the front this year, I think. We've seen phishing evolve from phishing to spear phishing to big game hunting. We see ransomware as a service. The entire supply chain is for
it really is overwhelming, and that's what a lot of people, customers or businesses we speak to, it's like trying to get a grasp of everything. But from what you're saying, and I think we've seen, some of the fundamentals that are available to them really could be a big part of the pie that they're trying to not that it's not complicated, but they really could do a lot by just getting those fundamentals.
Security is complex, but it need not be complicated. Across the Fortinet research and my own personal experience, I see that 80% of all the attacks that lead to disruptions and breaches could have been mitigated by simple to intermediate controls. There are things like having a properly configured next generation firewall goes a long way. Having a rigorous approach to application and vulnerability management goes a long way. Having a rigorous approach to security awareness training goes a long way. In fact, if you do those 3 things alone and add multi-factor authentication, you're going to address about 80+% of the security problems that we see today.
Very insightful, Jonathan. Before we jump into the next segment, I think we have another prize to give away. It's actually good timing for that. So if we could get the next question online, we'll great. Be interesting how many people have a idea on this one. What percentage of cybersecurity incidents are attributed to phishing attacks? 50, 60, 70, or 80? Give that a second. Again, it's Beats headphones and our Apple AirPods. We're giving away to the first person who answers this question correctly. And let's see the totals. Well, they got that one right. It is 80%. A high number of people thought that was the answer, and it is. It's one of those areas that I think a lot of companies today are really trying to figure out the education with their employees, making sure people are well aware of the threat that imposes, and kind of looking at. I mean, there's a bunch of threats and vulnerabilities potentially to an organization. But when you look at a statistic like that 80% are still coming in through a phishing mechanism, it really makes you think, okay, well, there's something to be said here. I got to put some time into this. And if you look at the workforce of tomorrow, like we keep referring to, the education and some of the responsibility that we're thinking businesses are going to achieve or ask of their employees is really at the center of it. I mean, we all have a responsibility to protect ourselves and the organizations that we work for in some way. And so it's not just someone else will take care of it anymore. We really have to be engaged as leaders and employees to kind of help this situation. Jonathan, any thoughts on that specifically?
So, yeah, it's a frightening number. I think the research we've seen suggests that it only takes 8 to 9 emails to make a phishing attack successful.
Wow.
So security awareness training is so fundamental. We need all to be security literate digital citizens, right? So at Fortinet, we offer our Network Security Experts Academy at no charge. So folks can take the NSC 1 and 2 for just basic security awareness training to understand what you should and what you shouldn't do. That goes a long way, but it also tells you that, you know, the endpoint security is actually the gateway into the entire enterprise.
Yeah.
And with remote working, email is the primary threat-borne vector for attacks today. And so making sure that the users are informed, making sure that the devices on which they're using is properly protected through endpoint protection, implementing strategies like zero trust to ensure that only the right people are accessing that right information goes a long way. And so you can expect that remote worker to be targeted more often than ever before. An interesting stat was that before the pandemic, we saw security awareness training programs with a failure rate of about 4 to 5%, meaning 5% were regularly clicking on illegitimate links, right? During the first 90 days of the pandemic of last year, we saw that rate go up to 22% as folks were beginning to work from home. They're getting pinged from all types of locations, and the sophistication of the phishing attacks grew. And so that's going to be key moving forward.
Yeah, it continues to be a weak area. I mean, you know, on the others, the adversaries are getting much more sophisticated and smarter about how they're going about doing it and making those, you know, emails seem more and more legitimate, and people are buying in. It takes some, you know, a lot. It's a persistent push by leadership in the organization with employees together to really continue to combat that.
So one comment on that, I think that a lot of people say, well, how do I address that? How do I make security part of my culture? And I would say, my first boss said, look, what gets measured gets done. And so measure the effectiveness of your security maturity today, run those security awareness training, see what your current failure rate, and track that over time. Benchmark against not only yourself, but your peers and other industry groups. And then make sure that security awareness and security performance are embedded in the organizational goals, the organizational statements, the mission statements, but also the individual MBOs, right? So from the leadership team down, everyone should have a portion of their review, a portion of indeed their compensation tied to the security performance of their team. And in that way, you create a culture whereby people actively
that will
measure.
get some attention.
Oh yeah. What gets measured gets done.
That will get some attention.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. A great feedback and very insightful. Kind of moving on a little bit into an area that you mentioned earlier, which is AI. You know, kind of all around us. I've really fascinated by where AI is going in the future, and kind of now it's ignited and fueled by the massive amounts of data that are available, that is being created worldwide. 59 zettabytes was the last number that I saw. I mean, come on, that it shows you that even though we haven't, maybe it doesn't look like we progressed as much as we thought we would on AI, the data that's available now, I think, is really going to accelerate. And to that end, we're going to see accelerations in the cyber area too, whether it be those innovative things that companies like Fortinet is doing, but also you know, what the bad actors are how they're using the technologies to be able to fool us. Kind of wanted to get your thoughts on you know, how AI is being leveraged, you think, smartly at Fortinet, and kind of some of the things you're seeing going to happen over the next several years.
You know, in many ways, cybersecurity is an arms race. So when we talk about AI and our ability to address the growing velocity, variety, and volume of data, and the growth of encrypted data, moving from 58 to almost 90% in the coming years, there's going to be a huge challenge. So when you're looking at vendors, Fortinet and otherwise, ask them, what is their AI approach? Is it machine learning? Is it deep learning? What's their history? AI is only as good as it was built and trained, right? Mm-hmm. So the ability to look at unstructured data versus structured data, self-learning, the ability to have an artificial neural network. Look at how many billions of nodes that network really has. And so if you're looking at AI, look for vendors and partners that have a deep history, demonstrated performance. When we show things like our virtual security analysts, it's an appliance right now. It's a form factor, but it'll change in the future, that leverages AI to replicate the role of a human security analyst. And we showed that in 52 weeks of testing, at week 34, we were outpacing consistently the average human. Humans tend to be good, bad, and indifferent. AI, when it's properly developed and trained, is continually self-learning, continually improving. At week 52, we showed not only was it consistently outperforming humans, but it was the equivalent of at least 5 human SOC analysts. And the average SOC analyst, fully loaded in the US, is about anywhere between $175,000 to $250,000. So we're talking about the equivalent of millions of dollars worth of cost savings. That's one of the things we're doing. But really, at Fortinet, leveraging AI allows us to take very mature, best-in-class technologies in prevention, detection, the SIEM engine, the analytics platforms, and SOAR for response, and allows us to take it to the next level, to accelerate the ability to detect and accelerate the ability to mitigate. And just so you know, like you said, the adversaries are using AI as well. They're using AI to look at software to see where the vulnerabilities are. Right. So that's how you find out. They're using AI to better develop phishing attacks. They're using AI for deep fakes. They're using AI to better craft their techniques, tactics, and procedures. And so it's going to be this arms race in many ways.
It's a race, a constant race to the finish. But I know that Fortinet is on the leading edge of this. Integrating it into your entire fabric, I think, is a key differentiator for you guys, and something that we're continuing to see evolve and have bigger impacts on our ability to defend, which is really fascinating. I know you guys have what any specific products? I know you mentioned the appliance, that help in one area or another, either from identifying early vulnerabilities or seeing some network anomalies that are indicative of something going on, or anything like that stands out?
Yeah, well, I think it's across the entire fabric, from leveraging the endpoint. 40 EDR leverages AI to better detect anomalous behavior on the endpoint. Your FortiGate firewalls are leveraging AI to better process the huge volumes of data that are coming across in hyperscale operations that you alluded to.
And they're all talking to each other. If an endpoint notices activity, I mean, it alerts other areas in the fabric, so that it creates
those two key words in all things moving forward: predictive and proactive. The ability to look at huge volumes of data and say, you know what? There's a 99.97 level of confidence interval that looks like the TTP associated with the following types of threats. So here's what we can recommend to proactively begin to mitigate that as early as possible on that kill chain, at the reconnaissance stage if possible, but all the way through to prevent the exfiltration of data if that's what's required. But likewise, the ability to leverage AI earlier, before the application is ever deployed, using AI to look at the application development process to identify those vulnerabilities and those bugs, to fix those bugs before the actual deployment. So what you see is AI taking very mature technologies and taking them to the next level. That completely separates Fortinet from the crowd, the ability to integrate AI across that technology stack.
Yeah, we've seen that, and that's so incredibly important right now, to be able to have a little bit of an edge on everything going on, So some key takeaways, and just kind of to for our audience, as well as I want to get to a couple of questions that I think we have on the Q&A board. But it's kind of like we talked about so many things today, and I kind of was hoping you could leave the audience with a little bit of a sense of really hone in on this, is there something to leave with today, or a couple of things to leave with today? What would they be from your perspective?
I think take this time as we emerge from the pandemic as an opportunity to get security right, to think about your architecture. How are you going to architect to ensure that networking, security, and compute all work as one? Don't think about security and networking separately. When you think about networking, it's SD-WAN. When you think about security, a lot of it's going to be zero trust. And in doing so, you really get to that second point of future-proofing your design, because you're not being reactive. You've already done a proactive approach, an architectural approach that says, here's my long-term vision. I've built in the flexibility to adopt and adapt technologies as requirements change. And then for tomorrow's workforce, look, what you're seeing today is going to be happening tomorrow. We expect greater flexibility. We want to have what we want delivered and consumed in the fashion that we want to consume it. So it's going to be anything as a service. And the challenge for the security teams, the business leaders, is how do I deliver anything as a service with great levels of security, performance, and reliability? And that starts off with that first block about getting your architecture right and not thinking about things in separate silos, but thinking about how am I ultimately going to optimize networking, security, and compute, because that's going to be the expectation moving forward.
That's great advice. Thank you. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions, Jonathan, if you don't mind, kind of pose those to you. Let's see, the first one, they're both anonymous. If an organization were looking to assess the current security stack, how would you recommend beginning assessing your own security stack?
So the first thing I would do, understanding my current state, is do a pen test. Have someone perform a pen test, outline where you are today, what your vulnerabilities are. Also take a look at our CTAP programs, our Cyber Threat Assessment Program at Fortinet. And we go in and then we provide an assessment around what your current environment looks like, where your vulnerabilities are, what you're missing, suggested controls, suggested strategies, and then plotting forward from there. I will tell you that not understanding your current state is probably not a reasonable approach, right? But understanding that, knowing that you have gaps, knowing that you have things that need to be addressed, and having a plan to do that, that's reasonable. So focus on those two things.
Great, thank you. The second question is, what is the biggest advantage of the Fortinet fabric versus taking a best of breed approach?
Sure. So one of the things about the Fortinet fabric, it is best of breed. So you see us in the Gartner Magic Quadrants for any number of technologies. I will tell you that by design, technologies that were built to purpose to collect and share information and work together is the right approach. Having a bunch of really good products that were never designed to work together is the kind of situation that got us into a lot of trouble. I will tell you that if it's about managing complexity, the fewer appliances, the fewer form factors, the fewer management consoles, the better. Having a multitude of best-in-class products means a multitude of management consoles. And what you end up doing is not having enough people trained for all of these different technologies and products, let alone experience to actually manage them, right? But then you have box sprawl or management. You have more complexity than ever before. And what you end up with is so much complexity that you miss things. You missed the vulnerability that needed to be patched. You missed the fact that your digital certificate had expired on that firewall, and therefore the adversary is able to exfiltrate the data and no one saw that. You missed the basic things, and the fabric in its ability to have coverage on the LAN, WAN, data center, and cloud edges means you have persistent visibility. Why? Because it's where networks come together, where misconfigured devices dwell and are undetected. It's where vulnerabilities go undetected or detected but unpatched. And it's where anomalous behavior, both inside threats and outside threats, occur that are not investigated. So my practical approach, having worked in this field as an operator, was that, look, I would rather have the ability to have persistent visibility on those network edges than a whole bunch of best-in-class products, which I can't hire enough people. Right?
We've got so much on our plate as technologists, and the more we could do to try to consolidate or simplify with a product like that's integrated like Fortinet, I think is a good approach. Okay, one last question, but it's a big one. So obviously, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about supply chain attacks.
Yeah.
But this one is, specifically referencing the Kaseya incident that happened a few weeks ago, and then before that it was SolarWinds, and we're all kind of continuing. These are kind of those Trojan horses, getting inside with unbeknownst to any of the security team. What's your take on it? How do you think we're going to get better at protecting ourselves, and then some of the suppliers giving us confidence that this will not be a recurring event?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a recurring event because we're entering the golden age of ransomware, because the risk to rewards ratio doesn't hinder adversaries. And so ransomware has been around for a while. It's a phishing attack in many ways. It starts that way. But in the case of Kaseya, yeah, they were able to leverage a vulnerability in the service provider to distribute ransomware. But the ransomware, the malware rather, was known. There were signatures for that. So had you been a Fortinet customer, you would have been already protected. So one of the things that you need to do is make sure your basics are in place. Properly configured devices, updated firewalls, defense in depth, right? And then you need to take
I don't know how they work.
like backing up your data so that you can restore operations quickly. And likewise, having visibility. Some of the other attacks, there were attacks against their IT infrastructure, but they had to shut down their OT infrastructure because they didn't have enough visibility. So the short answer for ransomware is get the fundamentals right. In the vast majority of cases, the malware is going to be known. The signature was available, the patch was available, and having a FortiGate with a virtual patch would address that. So you find Fortinet customers were protected by that. But also, follow FortiGuard Labs. All this is free of charge. We write blogs all the time. Within 24 hours of that, we had information out about what the mitigation steps you should take. Excellent. So yeah, it's fundamentals more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, I think that to that point, I mean, we're not helpless with it. But what, like the SolarWinds attack was I don't think it was a little different, right? Where they had actually integrated into the code, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't just a vulnerability. But there's continuing to go. There's always going to be potential there. I think what Fortinet is doing is actually building these defenses so that if something like that does happen, you have some key things in place to minimize damage.
You can have defense in depth, but also back up your data, right? So that you can restore. The key thing about backing up data is making sure that it's aligned with the SLAs of the business process. So if your business process has an SLA of 5 minutes, make sure you're backing up every 5 minutes, not 30 minutes. That goes a long way as well. But again, having persistent visibility allows you to understand the scope of the problems you're going to face. But
absolutely,
again, fundamentals.
Thank you for that. I think that was the last of the questions, but great questions from the audience. Appreciate you guys probing us a little bit and hopefully got everything you'd like answered. I think that's going to wrap it up for the day, Jonathan. If you have any final thoughts, I know we talked about a lot of things, super insightful for me, and I think our audience will probably agree they learned a lot today. But certainly any further questions, free to contact VENYU. We'll follow up with our Fortinet team and answer as many as we can to keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining today for the second session of the Future of Work. Thanks again, Jonathan Nguyen and the Fortinet team for really helping to support and educate customers and businesses out there. So thank you again. Everyone have a good day.